So what he means here when he says to the pastor of Pergamos, thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idol, and to commit fornication. What he's saying there is, you've got some Balaams in your church, some people who are teaching something that causes my people to sin against me, that causes the membership of the church to sin against me, and puts it to where I can't protect them. They're literally in the seat of Satan. And I can't protect them because now I've got to come and fight against them because they're entering into sin. So what were these sneaky things? Now I want you to catch something here. This is just as much the work of Satan as killing Antipas. Only it was more effective. Killing Antipas didn't work. The rest of the church and the pastor wouldn't deny Christ, even though he killed Antipas. So instead, he causes some bad doctrine to enter into the church, which then leads to some bad morals, and causes the church to lose the protection of God. And not just lose the protection of God, but actually be in danger of the Lord himself attacking the people of the church. That's what we're getting to here. Tactically, it was a brilliant move by Satan to get them to accept some things they shouldn't accept. So what is it that they actually did? Well, we're not really given details on it, but the hint here is that it has to do with eating things sacrificed to idol and commit fornication. What we know from history, if we take and we read that and we try to understand some stuff out of it and then make a practical application to today, really what we're seeing here is the idea there were those in the church that didn't believe separation was important. Separation from the world. Because really what happened with Balaam and Balak? Had the people of Israel, when these women came from King Balaam, when these worldly, ungodly women came in, if they had maintained some separation and said, no, we're not going to mingle with you, we're not going to invite you in, we're not going to party together, then you wouldn't have ended up in a situation where now they're committing fornication. There needed to be some separation, but there would have been people like, oh, what's wrong with having them in and everything. So to eat things offered to idols, if you read throughout the scripture, you go back to Acts 15, and this subject of things offered to idols kind of comes up, that believers shouldn't eat things offered to idols, and then you kind of get into, as you keep reading through the scripture, it almost looks like contradiction, where Paul is saying, look, food that's sacrificed to an idol is nothing. So food that's sacrificed to an idol, no big deal. If you eat it as something sacrificed to an idol and your conscience is hurt, then that's not good. But whatever's sold in the marketplace, what's sold in the shambles, just eat, and you're fine. So if we take sort of a practical application today, if you're traveling in an Islamic country, all of the meat that you can possibly buy, anything that you can eat, is halal meat. Meaning that's like the Islamic word for like kosher, that it's okay to eat. Well, for meat to be halal, it has to actually be offered to Allah when it's killed. So the butchers that are killing the animals are literally, laying hands on it, offering it to Allah and killing it in the name of Allah. If you eat halal meat, you're literally eating meat offered to an idol. And honestly, that's okay. If it's sold in the marketplace and you just buy it, if that's what's available to eat, you need to eat. But don't eat it as a thing offered to Allah. Don't eat it in respect to that. You certainly wouldn't go, as what was most likely the case in this scenario, go into the actual temple and sit and eat in the temple of the idols and eat it and just mingle with the people of the world in the idols' temples like that. That's not good. You shouldn't do that. So you see throughout Scripture what almost is contradictory. It's like you can't eat things offered to idols, and then Paul's like, well, you can. And then here you come to Revelation, and Jesus is like, I'm really upset with you, sir, Mr. Pastor, because you've let people in there who are teaching people to eat things offered to idols. And you're like, wait a minute, I thought Paul said you can eat things offered to idols. There's got to be something a little bit deeper there. This idea of there does need to be a separation between God's people and the people of the world. You can't have fellowship at the Lord's table and also eat at the table of devils. And that's from Paul. Paul's not contradicting himself there. It's just explaining. You can't go into a temple and sit down, a temple of an idol, and sit down and eat and fellowship with those people, and then turn around and go to church and have the Lord's Supper and fellowship with God's people. That's wrong. And the Lord is upset with this pastor for allowing people in the church who believe that that's okay. Because then that leads to another thing that he's holding against him, and that leads to that there's fornication in the church. Because the way that these worship things were set up was you didn't just eat food, but then you also went in and you were with a temple prostitute. That's how the worship service worked in many of these false religions. They're causing these people, there's a stumbling block that's entered into the church that's causing them to think it's perfectly fine to go in and eat things sacrificed unto idols, and then that leads to the point where it's perfectly fine to commit fornication. No big deal. Now that can be applied in a lot of different ways as you study fornication throughout the New Testament. There's application to what if you got people in the church, that are just checking up? What if somebody wants to marry somebody else's wife? Those are situations that are dealt with in the Scripture. Allowing that to continue, allowing that to go on, is something that the Lord holds a pastor personally responsible for. You've got fornication in the church. You've got people like, it's good enough that we all proclaim the name of Christ, or that we all hold maybe to a certain set of doctrines. Yeah, they're living in sin, but they're Christians too, so they can come on in. What a lot of preachers, what a lot of pastors in this world don't realize is Jesus is personally upset with them. He was personally upset with this man just because he had in the congregation people that had this doctrine, the idea that it's okay to mingle with the world and to bring the world into us and eat things sacrificed to idols and even get to the point of committing fornication. Then there's another thing he holds against him. Verse 15. So hast thou also then to hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate. So this other thing he's holding against him is also in the category of just allowing certain people to even be members of the church. That's what he's holding against this pastor. That he's allowing men that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans to be members of the church. Now, what is the doctrine of the Nicolaitans? $1 million question. The Bible doesn't say. The word Nicolaitan does not show up in any other book of the Bible. It doesn't show up anywhere else in Scripture. It first appeared earlier in chapter 2 here, in verse 6. But this thou hast, that thou hatest the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. He said that to the pastor of the church of Ephesus. Just kind of a final encouragement after the chastisement that he gave him. That you're like me, son. We both see the deeds of the Nicolaitans as just something terrible. I hate it. This doctrine of the Nicolaitans is the only doctrine that has the dubious honor of being said that Jesus hates it. There's lots of bad doctrine that you can find that the Bible speaks against. But nowhere do you find a doctrine where the Lord actually says, I hate that one. Now, I'm sure he hates all false doctrine. But it wasn't actually put in black and white in ink, except for this one, which tells me it matters. I think it's important. Whatever the doctrine of Nicolaitans is, I think it matters, or he wouldn't have gone out of his way to say that he hates it. So, what is this doctrine of Nicolaitans? Our only clue is the word itself.